Welcome to Ecological Policy, FW 620 at Oregon State University. This video will give you a brief introduction to the class, the material we'll cover, and how the overall material will be presented. The target audience for FW 620 is really focused on graduate students, and typically graduate students in fields such as natural resources, environmental sciences, civil engineering, political science, philosophy, and so on. It's really generally a pretty broad array of students, and they tend to come from science backgrounds, but not always. There are three goals in this class. The first goal is to instill for every student the ability to explain in a clear and logical way the basic principles of policy analysis. This is not a class for people to pitch their personal policy preferences or make a case for any preference they think ought to be adopted, but rather to analyze in an impartial way case studies. The second goal is to develop an ability to evaluate and assess in a clear and understandable way how these issues can be analyzed from a policy perspective, not a science perspective or not a personal policy preference perspective, but stepping back and looking at the overall issue in an impartial way. Third goal is to analyze a series of specific case studies to learn something about an array of policy issues and how to deconstruct those case studies. In particular, we're going to focus on how science interconnects as one element in policy analysis. Ecological policy is a 10-week course, but the first 10 days or so prior to the beginning, I'll open up Canvas, and so you can access some pre-course material. This material will be an array of choices for background reading about policy and policy analysis, just to give you kind of a context for the material that will come. The first week, we'll get into actual how do you do policy analysis, and specifically how do you apply these principles of axioms of ecological policy analysis that will be presented. And this is really an orientation week to get you kind of up to speed on how policy analysis is actually done. Then week 2, we'll get into our first case study, and that case study will be wildfire policy. And wildfire policy is obviously a big topic across the United States and Canada, particularly in the western United States and Canada. The next case study number 2, will be water policy. And water policy has many, many different ramifications, but we'll focus particularly on a very long-term and ongoing case study in the Klamath River on the border between California and Oregon. In week 4, we'll move to a different type of case study, and that's these large predators and how these are managed, what kind of policies are associated with these predators being wolves, cougars, grizzlies, and some others. And this will be case study number 3 for you to practice on. Case study number 5 will be about wild salmon policy, and particularly wild salmon policy along the west coast in California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and southern British Columbia. And this will be case study number 4. This is a very large, a very expensive proposition, well over $1 billion a year spent on this. And so it's a serious economic effect here, as well as a policy debate. Week 6, we'll move to a different kind of area, genetically modified organisms, GMOs policy. And the question there will be ecological effects and how is policy developed relative to ecological effects. And this will be our 5th case study. Week 7, we'll move to a different case study yet, and that is the Northwest Forest Plan, which has been a long-term, multiple decades controversy involving what is the proper and appropriate use for the national forests, including BLM lands. This will be case study number 6, and the focus of this, at least the superficial focus, are the plight of the spotted owls, but as we'll see, that's really just the tip of the issue. Week 8, we'll move into a broad case study, again, a very different one, case study number 7, climate change. And here the issue really is not so much if climate's changing, that's generally accepted. Long-term climate changes is very common, it always occurred, but how much of that change is due to human actions, and what does society want to do, if anything, about that? Adapt to it, mitigate it, whatever. There's a lot of different choices, and the policy trade-offs are extremely complex and very divisive, to say the least. Week 9, we'll move into a different kind of a case study yet, and that is one involving marine mammals, particularly whales. And this brings in a different dimension because whales and some marine mammals have attributes that some in society rank very differently than other animals and plants. And so we'll see that a case study can get into very much moral judgments and so forth. This will be case study number 8. Our final case study will deal with the whole issue of marine protected areas and in particular ecosystem-based management and what this means and how it's different from past, or even if it is different from past management strategies. Our focus here will be on policy and the future policy relative to marine protected areas. There are a number of readings that will be required in FW 620. First, each week there'll be a policy background. This is about a 10-page document that describes the topic for the week, a little bit of perspective on it, and just kind of gets you set to talk about the issue. Then that same week we'll read 2 policy advocacy articles. These are not scientific articles usually. They tend to be articles written by policy advocates who are trying to pitch a particular policy preference. And these will be very contrasting views of the case study that we're covering that week. Also, there are a number of background articles that will be posted in Canvas. Both the policy backgrounder itself will be posted in Canvas as well as these additional articles. And there will be no textbook for this course. Now, critiques are a pretty core element of FW 620, and a critique is a short, brief analysis, usually 1,000 to 1,500 words, analyzing the case study, describing it in a policy-neutral, a policy-impartial way, and presents the basic core arguments for the various policy choices. And we'll spend a lot of time doing this and practicing this. Now, each week there will be one critique required, and each student is required to write one every week. Although the reality is that I only use the top 8 grades, so you're allowed to miss 2. I recommend that students do all 10 if they're able, and then I'll just drop the lowest 2 grades. Also, the format and style of these critiques is very standardized, and the purpose of this is to reduce my grading bias. So within Canvas, you'll see a template that you need to follow exactly. It's very simple and straightforward, but it does help me with grading. Now, the discussion board is the other major part of this class, and this discussion board really takes the place of the roundtable discussion that's typically found in graduate students that are taught face-to-face. In earlier versions of this class, when it was taught on campus face-to-face, we would have perhaps 10 to 12 students in a class who'd sit around a table and just discuss a case study. You can't do that obviously online, but this replacement is discussion board, the Canvas discussion board. And actually there's a lot of advantages to the Canvas discussion board versus face-to-face. Given a choice, I would actually probably prefer to do it by the Canvas discussion board rather than face-to-face for a number of different reasons. But the key thing here is for you as a student is that over the 10-week quarter, each student will participate regularly. This is not something that you maybe show up once a week or twice a week and participate, but it's something that you contribute to regularly, like every day. And your contribution will be evaluated as to content, originality, frequency, and timeliness. These are not involved, convoluted, detailed contributions. This is more similar to what you would find in a roundtable face-to-face discussion. Grading in FW 620 is pretty straightforward. I use an A to F grading system, A being worth 4 points, A minus being worth 3.7, and so on. The grading itself will be determined 80% based on the quality of the weekly critiques, and the other 20% will be on the quality, frequency, and timeliness of your participation in the discussion board. Welcome to FW 620, and more importantly, welcome to the policy world. We'll have a good time exploring how to become a policy analyst.